full screen. Go for that. Ah, that's it. We're going, Mark. Praise Jabulon.
Right on.
That's one of our catchphrases, praise Jabulon. Have you ever come across that phrase in your research, Jabulon?
No, tell me about it.
It's like it's something to do with like the Freemasonry triple godhead. So Jah being Yahweh and Bull being Baal and On being Osiris from ancient Egypt. And apparently this is some secretive word that they use, Jabulon. But I just found it funny and put it on a T-shirt.
Yeah. No, the person I just brought up, Michael One, he just did a presentation on Baal. And yeah, it's quite an interesting character. Personally, I think sometimes people go too far when they do this research. They get a little scared and think like the whole world's falling on their head, and make a lot of those connections where they aren't. But with the right discernment, you find that more often than not, there's no such thing as a coincidence, and yeah, Babylon, and the Tower of Babel, and what does it sound like when someone's not making sense? They're babbling, and the Tower of Babylon was kind of like this moment where humanity got divided into all these different tongues. And from then we became, uncooperative with one another. And I think that's where we're heading now, is like the mending of that division that was created, like the Piscean age that we're leaving is all about division. And now we're heading into this Aquarian age. I think they want to use English as the global language. It's pretty obvious. I didn't come up with that thought, but it's curious because it's a mix of Irish, it's a mix of German, it's a mix of French. It's sort of a mix of different languages, English, and it's just curious how this language and then I think Ethiopian are like the two languages that they're teaching to this AI computer, right?
Right.
Have you heard anything about this AI computer that they're trying to build?
No. What's this?
So, yeah, I was listening to the Higher Side chats, and I believe Alison McDowell was talking about this and how this AI computer that they want everybody generated into, it is learning two languages first, which is the English and Ethiopian. And I just thought that was so strange, considering Ethiopia is apparently the place where the Ark of the Covenant was left, and they're one of the only countries in Africa that was never colonized. Even though the Italians tried to colonize them, they successfully fought them off. But it's almost like the world leaders, the global world leaders, want to like either shove one at them for never bowing down by kind of pushing them into this globalism thing in that way, or maybe it connects, because we have this place, the Horn of Africa, the Strait of what is it? That sea, is it the Red Sea or the Dead Sea? From my perspective, they're kind of the same thing, but the Red Sea, right, is where Israel and Egypt, like, they run along that, and then that goes down.
Yeah.
Like the Gulf there.
Gulf of Arabia is on the other side.
Yes.
The Tigris and the Euphrates, yeah.
So there's something about this region of the world,
Yeah, well, crossing the Red Sea goes back to the book again, isn't it? Although some guys say it's the Reed Sea, and then it's a mistranslation, and what they meant to say was they were crossing the Reed Sea. But there is something about, you're right, there's something about this geographic area, isn't there, that seems special. And it's
the river, right? This Tiger and Euphrates River was said to be, the fertile crescent, the place where humanity was born. But when we get into the prophecies and the teachings of Edgar Sayce, and then you go even further back and you see Plato and all these Greek guys are writing about Atlantis, and with such detail. And then we actually find these megalithic structures that sort of match up to the Atlantean story.
Yeah.
To me, I think there might even be something older, right? And this isn't, again, my thought, original thought. This is just based on the research and this being the sponge of all these different podcasts. Things work in a sort of reflective way, in a microcosm, macrocosm way. And just like the Tigris and Euphrates River create this sort of like fertile zone where humanity was supposedly like born, right over here in America, there's a very ancient old river called the Susquehanna River, and it becomes the Chesapeake Bay, which is where Washington, D.C. is. It's where the first computer was ever built. It was where some of the first work with electricity ever happened.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a very interesting place, but it's also strange because the Susquehannock people and the word Susquehanna actually has more roots in Gaelic language, Irish language, going back to the connection that I just, where English is kind of like this mix of Irish and German, but we also have this strange history of Ireland where were the people in Ireland totally living just on that one little part? I don't believe so. I think there was a time when either the ocean was much lower, there was more land to traverse, or they just were very skilled at seafaring and they were able to go off and find new land, and they never wrote back. They didn't send letters back. So it's like if Irish people left and went to America and made a little civilization, how would we have known? It would have been fairly remote, and then they could have just blended right in when the rest of the Europeans came and started building these colonies, and maybe even that's a part of what these Tartarian researchers are thinking about when they talk about how it's sort of like rewriting history. This place was not what it was, and then these people come in and they say, oh yeah, no, these are our buildings, they weren't here before, and they rewrite the books and make it seem like all these old looking buildings are actually built by colonists. But you go back and you read the colonists reports of what they had and the provisions they had, and it doesn't always add up. It's like, okay, you're telling me they were able to quarry these big, huge pieces of stone to build these like old town halls and libraries and these things that just look Roman or totally ancient. Like there's these libraries that are very common on the East Coast with
Right.
like bright red stone, orange stone. And I could just be a complete novice, and like some guy who's an expert in archaeology and geology and architecture could come and be like, dude, you're an idiot. There's an explanation for that. But the fact of the matter is, from my perspective, from the story of my life, there's something mysterious about that. And I think as it connects to what you asked me about before we started recording, the synchromystic experiment and the ever expanding now, is like your moment, the moment you're in, the things that come to your awareness are important and valuable, and they align with your purpose. And for me, that purpose is sort of like going into these mysteries and looking this stuff up, and I chose that. I said, yeah, that's what I want to do. And more things started presenting themselves, right? So it's kind of where I'm at now, is like, how do we play with these synchronicities in a way that's proactive and gets us to this kind of law of attraction place where we're actually manifesting our future, and our destiny. And I mean, the signs, the symbols, the synchronicities, they start to increase in their volume as you expand your awareness, So.
That's something you mentioned, pulling on a thread, and that's something I noticed when I started getting into esoteric subjects, and that you'll read a book and then you'll read 3 books further down the line, and you'll remember something from the first book and you'll recognize a connection there, and you feel as you go into more of these subjects that you are pulling on a thread, and more things start becoming revealed to you, and you start drawing connections where previously you wouldn't have even bothered to look. And so you can end up reading books on very different topics, whether it be like gematria or sacred geometry or the tarot or astrology, ancient history, and you can still pick out these certain accents and threads that run between these subjects, and it does give you like a mystical feeling. You think, whoa, this is beyond a coincidence. There's something here. There's something that needs more investigation, and you feel like you're just starting to. It's like a Christmas day, and you get that present, and you just peel off a tiny corner of the wrapping, if you can see what it is, and you just feel like you're pulling more and more threads, and it fills you with intrigue, and then you feel like, am I going to find something not just meaningful but life-changing? Is there some sort of greater truth to be discovered that are sort of prosaic explanations for everything, aren't even beginning to comprehend?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, it almost seems like a form of madness to somebody who's not in this.
It
Like,
becomes an obsession.
curiosity. Yeah, well, but that's the thing is like, you have to be present, I think being present is what I found is the most important thing, because sometimes the synchronicities, they're pointing you towards things that you're avoiding in your life, maybe, or things that need more attention. But yeah, it does kind of seem like a form of madness to people who might not be in the sphere. Like, how do those things connect? You imagine like the red strings on the wall all strung up over a map, like making all these connections. But really, it's something to participate in before you can fully understand, and that's why I bring it back to purpose, because from my perspective, it seems like I've always had the intention of giving back to the world somehow. I've always been curious in a deeper meaning, and when I look into my astrological chart, it sort of backs that up, which is always cool. I encourage people to look into that for themselves, because I'm not an expert. I'm only beginning to like figure that out about myself. But I think purpose is really important, and some people's purposes might be a lot less complex than that. Like, some people aren't here to go and solve a bunch of mysteries, but if you're listening to something like this, the Amish Inquisition, I would imagine that you're interested in mysteries. And that's kind of like, to bring it back to podcasting, why I love podcasting so much, because it's kind of like synchronicity fuel, because all these podcasts are just waiting out there for you to find. And there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of podcasts that you could listen to that would probably add something to your life in a positive way. And you don't know which one it's going to be, really. Like, sometimes you just see a name and you're like, oh, that sounds cool. Like, I remember the first time I saw the word Grimerica, I was like, what's Grimerica? Like, what is that? That's like America, grimy. I'm
Grim.
expecting like a rap, underground rap, like grime, something like that. And I go and listen, and it's like two kind of polite Canadian guys, just chatting with mystical people and historians. And just like you described before, you get to talk to all these awesome authors and scholars and thinkers, and that's what, for me, Grimerica's show offered, like this whole group of people that I didn't know existed, from my limited perspective before I found podcasting. Because the authors, they seemed real, but they were real on a different level. Like, I could read their words, but it wasn't until I like heard Joseph Farrell's voice that his book Gene Giants, Monsters and Men actually came to life, or like Mark Booth and his book The Secret History of the World. Like, I was able to hear those guys get interviewed, hear their voice, and now it's almost like going back and reading their book has another dimension to it. And that also is synchronistic, because I just found those books randomly, thinking like, oh, that's an interesting cover, like, let me check this out. And that book changed my life. It's really profound. And then now, having the opportunity, like you said, to be in the podcasting world, I've talked to people who have inspired me that are just podcasters, like Graham and Darren from the Grimerica show. They did the 20th episode of the podcast I do. And even the podcast I do, I kind of was inspired by Sam, because Sam Tripoli was like, "Hey, what's the name of your podcast?" I told him the old name of my podcast, and he was honest with me. He was like, "That kind of sucks, come up with something else that makes more sense." So I was like, "Okay." And I'm hanging out at my family's house. I'm like, "Hey, I'm working for this podcast. It's called Tinfoil Hat. I'm so excited." And they're like, "What? Like, that's not a job. Like, what are you talking about? Like, you need to get a real job." And I'm like, "Oh my God, my family thinks I'm crazy. Like, they don't realize how big of an opportunity this is." And then that's where the name of my show came from. My family thinks I'm crazy. And that's always been true, but it kind of took that moment synchronistically to create it. And now here I am. My family thinks I'm crazy kind of birthed this other project called the Synchromistic Experiment in the Ever Expanding Now, because I want to be able to focus in, and have conversations with people like Michael Wan and Ross Ben and Chris Knowles and Laurel Erica and all these people who kind of focus on, and those are just people I've spoken to in the past few weeks. There's so many more. One guy that I've never met or talked to, Michael Sandler, I think his name is, and he's really inspired me a bunch with his automatic writing and all the
Oh,
information about automatic writing, and really what that's done is shown me that my life is a story, and once you own that and start to like feel that in an authentic way, you can rewrite the story of your life in the direction that you want to live it. Would you say that's true for you, Phil?
yeah, and it's quite empowering. We it depends how you grew up, but I mean, I sort of grew up in the sort of when the new atheists were big, and there's sort of a tendency to nihilism. There's a desolation and a sort of pointlessness of it all when you're immersed in this materialist paradigm that we currently live in, which from the post Enlightenment era, it's sort of got worse and worse, and sort of peaked with the new atheists. And it seems to me that there is a shift, and that people are sort of rejecting this worldview, this paradigm, if you like, and saying, "No, I don't believe I'm a fucking." A sack of meat, a biological robot spinning, an insignificant ant on the spinning rock hurtling through space. I think there's something more to us. I think there's something special about the human race. As corny as
Yeah.
it sounds, and if I was 20 years younger, I'd be laughing my cock off at myself for sounding like chucking hippy dippy bullshit about. But that I really have had that experience, and it's hard to talk to people about because we're kind of in the minority. you know, Most people are still entrenched in that sort of biological
Well,
determinism.
and I think that this stuff kind of is in the air, because I remember, like, I was born in 1994, so that was sort of towards the end of that era,
Yep.
and but I absorbed it, because at a young age I was very much interested in animals and nature and science, so all of that appealed to me, and it felt like, oh, okay, yeah, evolution makes sense. This all makes sense, and like I started getting interested in war and politics in like middle school and like weird shit like espionage. Like, why is a middle schooler interested in espionage? But I was. And then, something happened. Like, martial arts came next naturally, but something happened that sparked me to smoke cannabis. And I think that really pushed me towards where I'm at now. And it's like opening my eyes to spirituality, because I would have been the same way, like laughing, even from that 15-year-old perspective, like not knowing shit. I thought I knew it all.
Yep.
And like being an atheist was like one of the ways that I thought I was smarter than my grandparents and my parents who would go to church. And now I kind of look back and I'm like, okay, well, I still don't agree with the church, but it's more for like a philosophical reason now rather than just like a cultural reason. And cannabis really opened up that ability for me to think in this new way philosophically. And I don't want to say that it was like the creation of that new part of me, but it definitely was like a fuel. It accelerated my spiritual growth. And I mean, I've smoked every day for the past 9 years. So I don't know if that's the healthiest way to smoke cannabis, but it's definitely a commitment that I've made. And I think that it's benefited me in the realms of spiritual intelligence and just straight up ability to kind of absorb what's around me. And yeah, I don't think I would be here if it wasn't for cannabis. But then again, podcasting was the next, phase of it for sure. But yeah, I definitely, I think it's in the air, and ever since 2012, there's been this feeling in the air of harmony. I think certain people can tap into it 100%. Some people only feel it like 60, 70%, like me, I'm probably like a 60 percenter. Like harmony is kind of like where I'm trying to be at, even though the matrix is still dragging me down that 30, 40% some of the time, right? But then there's people who are totally flipped. Like they don't experience harmony unless they like go on a vacation or something, because they're so into the matrix and the way the matrix of our culture and technology has shaped our lives, onto this calendar system that we can't just sit and observe and have a moment of peace, in nature.
No, it's something that's missing, and this concept of free time as well. You go back to, I mean, they reckon now that hunter gatherers had a lot of free time. It didn't really, all they had to do was look after the shelter and the food supply and the water, and other than that, it was playtime. Other than making bits and clothes and building shelters and whatnot. But our lives are so consumed now. We're just consumption addicts, and we're born into this system. It's lucky that you get to break out of it and realize what's going on, because you're born and raised in this system of consumption. You're bombarded with advertising from the day you're born. You have your cultural norms and social norms that you have to adhere to. You grow up, you go to school, you get a job, you work to 65, and then you retire. It's like people have their whole lives planned in front of them. And I would think, what was the point? What did I actually learn? And, I was lucky. I came to a point in my life where I realized that it wasn't like an epiphany or a eureka moment or anything, but I was just spending so much of my time on meaningless shit, and it wasn't fulfilling. And I found there was so much value in the pursuit. Once you open your mind and try and get rid of some of this programming and think deeply about yourself and what you think you're here for.
Right.
Yeah, thing is, I don't think people are introspective enough. I think a lot of people are just so hammered. They're so hammered by the daily grind that when they get home, they've worked 8 hours, they've picked the kids up, made the dinners and whatnot. They're so exhausted. They've no room. They've no mental energy to think, and they've no physical energy. And so Netflix goes on, and I'll finish that box set and maybe have a glass of wine to fucking numb the.
And even this like paradigm of the hunter gatherer, and it's not you. I mean, that's kind of a general description of man's ancient past, but I mean, I just don't see the evidence for that. I think people lived in civilizations that were much more advanced than that. But besides that, look at our diets. I think our diets right now are ultimately, for the most part, the majority of people are eating things that are contributing to that sluggish mentality, of like, I don't have the time to think about anything, so I'm just gonna let this television consume the time that would, and entertainment, the word, it's just to attain your mental space or enter your mental space.
Bread and
I just
circuses.
Yeah, I just think that when I stopped watching television, it was around the same time that I started listening to podcasting a lot more. And don't get me wrong, like I got my like Twilight Zone DVDs, like the original Star Trek DVDs, like I'll watch those every now and then.
Yeah.
But at the same time, at, I'm coming to that place from the perspective of how was, the smart man that created this, like, what was the message he was putting into this? Because there's always, a message, and art is art. We can interpret things. I don't want to become like a Luddite and say, oh, everything is terrible, don't participate in the media. But if you can approach the media with this perspective of discernment, like, what's the bias, what's the agenda, what's the message behind this, you start to notice a lot of themes. And I think that's what gets you sick of media ultimately, and why you want to go back to some of the older stuff, like the original series of Star Trek or the Twilight Zone, or, from a time when things were a little more artistic. Maybe that's just my perspective, but I, for the most part, Netflix, it didn't take me more than a month or two to cancel it, because I got so bored. I'm like, there's nothing here that appeals. I never was a fan of horror movies because regular movies are just so horrifying already. They're just like, is this what life is to people? Because, when I smoke and I go for a hike, and, like last night, I was sitting peacefully by the beach, and two foxes ran out of the tall grass, ran right up to where my girlfriend and I were sitting three times. We're just sitting there peacefully. That was way more entertaining than anything you can find on Netflix. Just seeing wild foxes doing their thing in nature, on the beach too, of all places. It was just such a beautiful sight. But I think that's part of the scene, the synchromistic experiment, and the ever expanding now, is when you put yourself in the place of awareness and presence of the moment, the creator, the higher intelligence, whatever force, this omnipresent force that pervades all of us and permeates between all of us, it can bring you to appreciate those special moments. That's just one of many animal moments, and maybe that's just because I love animals, that type of omen means more to me, and that's what comes up in my, you know destiny. For other people, it might not be that way. Maybe somebody out there, like, really loves cars, and that's part of their synchronicity. They see, certain cars, or whatever's kind of ubiquitous, because that's part of synchronicity. It's like that nothing's random, and we have this huge kind of almost chaotic field that we call the matrix. But there's no such thing as random. It's chaotic, but it's not random. There's order in every little experience, and the way things happen to you in your life, they're a reflection of your inner world. Like, when you're frustrated, traffic seems to be a little more frustrating. you know and when you're taking it easy, oh, maybe you don't notice it as much, and then traffic opens up a bit. I don't know how things are in the UK, other than that you guys drive on the other side of the road,
The
but
right side,
over
yeah.
here, I'm in between New York City and Boston, some of the biggest cities, in the world. So traffic can be kind of a nightmare depending on which road you take. But that's kind of like life. If you take the wrong route, you're going to have more obstacles than you would if you took the back roads, you went through the nature. So maybe this is another kind of soapbox moment that has no conclusion, but I think the synchromistic experiment, it's an experiment that you have to take in your own life. It's not that we're experimenting, we're exploring now, but when you first get into it, it's like an experiment. You have to test it out and see what happens. And maybe, your experience is going to be a lot different than mine, in which case, get in touch with me, because that's a part of it. This sort of network of organic experiences, and adding them up from, the little stories, and seeing how they build into this bigger story, and how we can all solve the mystery together when we have our head on straight, and we're like figuring these things out. Like, oh, why is this orange type of stone used in every library, in the East Coast?
Yeah.
Like, maybe there's a guy who knows it, maybe he's wrong. And that's the cool part of, like, going into this mystery, is like, even something as like bland you might think is architecture, like, oh, who cares, squares, rectangles, triangles, wood, stone, who cares, you know? No, there's a lot of symbolism on buildings, statues, you know, even down to the little like curved lines with a flower. Like everything has a sort of meaning and resonance. And that's something that I've just really tripped out on lately, is like looking at all these buildings with new eyes. Like, wow, okay, why is there a statue of a woman, you know, with a spear stabbing a panther? Like, I just saw this today. She's riding a horse, she's got a spear, and she's stabbing a panther, and the panther's on the front of her horse. And this is in Connecticut, where there's no panthers. So
Was it
whatever
Hillary
makes
Clinton on the panther?
She might have a house somewhere in Connecticut. I wouldn't be surprised by that, but yeah, it's just out of place things like that, like a panther statue in a place where there's no panthers. Like, you know, there's a meaning behind it. What is the meaning? And you know, when we get into the darker conspiracy stuff, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, there are some symbols like, you know, Saturnian type symbols that come up with the same groups over and over, or like with the Freemasons, they're always close to a river. You know, I mean, if a town has a river, the Freemason temple is probably across the street from that river.
Yeah.
You know, I would say 9 times out of 10, at least where I'm at, or
I'll,
some sort of landscape structure that's, you know, unique. And then even down to like, all right, Ross Ben, who I just met up with in Philadelphia. I mentioned Tara and my girlfriend and I mentioned like, wow, there's a lot of churches in Philadelphia, and he was like, yeah, there's a lot of red door churches. Have you ever heard about this, Phil? A red door
no.
church?
What's a red door
So,
church? It doesn't
so
sound good.
according to no, no, right? It does not. So, according to Ross Ben, who has his book "Free Your Mind" and "Free Your Mind" and "Your Mind Will Follow," great book, as well as "Great Mystery Philadelphia," another great book. He told us that a red door church is a church that's built on top of an ancient burial ground.
Okay.
So, I mean, if you've ever seen like Pet Cemetery, you can imagine what kind of stuff
Yeah.
is going on when you mess around with ancient burial grounds, you know? But that's a part of the mystery, is like, why are these certain groups building churches
On top of.
in particular spots? You know, it's because they have a esoteric knowledge that is not generally shared with the public. And I think that's something that I've always been very fascinated in, is the esoteric. And I know that's something that a lot of people in our community here in the podcasting community are excited to learn about, because, you know, we're in the age of Aquarius where nothing is going to be hidden anymore. You know, it's all coming to the light.
I like the stuff about it's funny how things, holy places always seem to get built on top of each other. It's like when
Right.
when the Spaniards made it to the New World, and you know, wherever there was a Native American holy place, it, you know, bulldoze it and put a church there. It's
Right.
like the actual geography has a significance, and
Exactly.
you get
You
into
know,
sort of ley lines and stuff like that, and like there's some sort of geographical system at work.
absolutely. Yeah, and around here in New England, you know, any place that was sacred to the Native Americans, they would call it devil's something. So like there's the devil's den, there's the devil's hop yard, there's the devil's cliff, there's the devil's, you know, this and that. So all of these places that you might see on a map that say devil typically were sacred places to the Native Americans. And you know, the puritanical kind of fear got them to label it as such to keep people away, or maybe to demonize this, you know, strange group of people that they were trying to colonize. So it was definitely, you know, that was something. When I learned about that, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I went to this place called the Devil's Den uh, in Connecticut, where there's like this underground cave, and you can just feel the vibes around here. Something weird went down. But you know, that site is more of an experiential site. If you want to consider like something that you can see with your eyes, like there's all of these stone alignments. Like in Connecticut, there's one that's kind of close to the shore. It's called Gungiwamp, and it's these stone caverns big, huge, massive stones with moss and dirt kind of covering them, and they're almost similar to what you'd have in Ireland with like the I forget the proper name, but it's like two stones and a flat stone
A,
over
a
it
dolmen.
built into a hill. Yeah, yeah. And they have a couple of them, but they're situated in such a way that the back window of the little cavern, reflects the light on the solstice, right? So on the solstices, so these stones are huge, and they're also aligned just right so that, it's like a clock or a calendar. So this is just one example, and people in Connecticut, for the most part, have no idea that this place exists. It's not like Stonehenge where you can, take a tour, and you'd have to really do some research before you go and take a tour. It's not, publicized, and it's not easy to get to, but it exists, and that's a part of this larger mystery. There's so
Yeah.
many unexplained little nooks and crannies
You'd
of your own
you'd
backyard.
you'd love it over here. We've got tons of megalithic stone circles and dolmens. I mean,
Yeah,
the
tell me
UK
more.
is riddled with them. Like I passed one the other week. I went on vacation the other week and I passed one, and it was just in a farmer's field, but it had like a fence around it, and it was like that was a 3-stone dolmen. And
Okay.
but there's loads. When I went last time I went on a holiday, I went to the other side of the country and I passed the UK's biggest freestanding megalith. I think it was about 30 feet tall, and there was a church next to it. So there was this megalith. It's like what we were saying about building on top. This site's been there for 5,000, more than 5,000 years, I think. And there's it's in a church graveyard, and there is a Roman casket there as well. I forget what they call them, a Roman coffin. So you've got ancient prehistoric or sort of Bronze Age, about maybe 2000 BC. You've got Roman stuff there from the year zero, and then you've got a church there from the 18th century. So it's like every 2,000 years, some got built in this site, or there's human activity around this site. And 2,000 years, that's like 2,160 years. It's a what do you call it? Not the a processional number. 216. It's HD, isn't it? Super HD 216. You double that, you get 432, don't you? So 432 megahertz, and it ties in with the ratio of the moon and the Earth and all that stuff. It's like everything's connected, and it's just funny that every 2,000 years something sort of religious gets put in this exact same spot.
Yeah, down to the exact measurement, and in alignment with the celestial calendar, and
Yeah.
I when you brought up the Roman part, it kind of threw me off, because that's something that I'm particularly fascinated in right now, is how the Roman Empire sort of took what was Druidic culture and co-opted it, really erased it from history. Now we only have like King Arthur and Merlin's legends, but like for the most part, a lot of that stuff was lost. Am I wrong about that?
I mean, pretty much. I mean, the Romans got up to the north of England. They never finished the job. So there would have been some cultural transmission, right in the north of Scotland, you would imagine, during the Roman occupation. But I think, like you, we've got sort of a cultural memory as a species of something that happened before. And it's like Graham Hancock put it best when he says we're a species with amnesia, or words to that effect.
And that's why I think this mystery, the history, it's all very fascinating, because we're starting to wake out of that illusion, right? I mean, and I mean, even down to like, okay, so in Connecticut, there's New London, and it's on the Thames River, right? Which is where London is, right? In the UK is on the Thames River. So, or you guys call it the River Thames, right?
Yep.
So I just thought, there's something magical about that where they're naming things the same. They're sort of creating these like reflections, there's New Britain, Connecticut, and then there's Britain, but there's New London and then the Thames River. And I just thought,
New York.
right, York, exactly. And York, that's a Roman outpost in England, in ancient England, right? So
Yeah,
it comes
there's
back to
a
them.
statue of oh my god, I'm blanking on his name. The Emperor
Caesar?
Constantine.
Oh, okay.
Emperor. There's a big statue of Emperor Constantine in the center of York because he was the first Christian Roman emperor,
Right.
and he was. I'm pretty sure he was coronated or as Caesar in York, and then he went back to Rome to take the title. Best in
Right.
the world, Caesar.
And all of this is to say, like, I'm not a specialist. I don't have any answers. I'm just pointing out like these weird similarities and coincidences because there's so much more. And then you find a guy like Graham Hancock who has, multiple books about it, and he specializes in this total subject. But then there's like even deeper specialists like Michael Wan who specializes in, the Susquehanna River, and then Ross Ben who's like checking out Philadelphia and specializing in all the mystery there. So when we can create this larger picture of what's going on
Mhm.
from all of the different intelligent people and all of the resources we can gather in this kind of networked way, it's going to be something to, really counter against places like the Smithsonian Institute, here
Yeah,
in
yeah.
America, who they basically try to, corral history into these narratives, like hold.
Absolutely, yeah. We had Adam Stokes on who wrote a book about giants in Ohio,
Mm,
and
yeah,
he told us all about the Smithsonian, and yeah, particularly when it comes to Native American history. We're the Smithsonian. We have this narrative, and that's going to be the truth from now on. And
right.
we're only just starting to piece things back together now. It makes you wonder. I often ask myself, how historically accurate is history? The
Mm,
history that we're given, anyway. And this is the thing that because I love history and I love reading about history. And the one thing you learn is you've got to you can't just read a text. You have to read the author as well. Who wrote it? When were they alive? What were the circumstances while they were alive? What was this author's political alignment? You've got
mm,
to. You've said this word twice, and it's the best word for it is discernment.
mm,
It's trying to piece things together yourself, and it's really hard because I love wacky stuff, and you can end up going down a rabbit hole just because it's so tantalizing and intriguing, and you could be being led astray, and you've got to check. You've got to be so careful with what you're consuming. I mean, what's your attitude to research? Do you like super focus on subjects when you're researching in the esoteric realm, or is it more of a shotgun approach, or do you even have a method? Have you even stopped to think about how you conduct your research?
yeah, no, I love this question because I definitely over the past few weeks have thought about it. But it's like a form of like bibliomancy, you kind of go into a bookstore and the right book comes to you, and I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like, out of the hundreds of books I've bought, I've read every single one, but I'm a pretty fast reader and I skim and scam and I find, scan, not scam. Sorry about that. Skim and scan. I hope people aren't thinking I'm skimming and scamming, but anyway, so I skim and scan these books, and it's so funny, like the way that the information jumps out, and right now, I'm like kind of creating this like library that's becoming sort of a burden since I don't have a place to live right now, so they're all just in my grandmother's basement waiting for me to find the right library.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think my research is hands on, and like these stones right here I could show you. I just got from the Susquehanna River, but we went and visited this place in the Susquehanna called Falmouth. You see these like
Yeah,
shallow.
there's a Falmouth in Cornwall on the
Oh
west
yeah.
coast of the UK. Yeah, same name again.
Okay. There we go. So yeah, in Falmouth, Pennsylvania, along the Susquehanna River, there's this spot where you can find all of these really strange rocks, really smooth rocks, and some of them are huge. I mean, most of them are huge, right? But the ones you can pick up are strange too. But the large ones have like bowls shaped into them, perfectly circular bowls, and water has collected in them and other stones have collected in them, and they're just like these shimmering little pools. And like for people who can only maybe see online, I definitely recommend looking it up, because they're really out of this world stones along the Susquehanna River. And just going there and experiencing the energy, thinking about what this could be, and then going to the experts, because the experts say like a glacier created this. But like this stone right here, I hold it in my hand and I see like all these shell imprints, and it makes you wonder, like, would a glacier have done this? How could a glacier have done this? I mean, theoretically, if it was cold enough to where a glacier was going on, is that alone enough force to imprint a shell into stone? Like, I don't know. Maybe. But these are the kind of things you can like kind of just go, and if you go to the right place and you really put it out there. It was only a year ago that I didn't know Michael Wan. I was just a fan of the Higher Side Chats, and I listened to his conversations with Greg Carlwood. And I was driving by the Susquehanna River just by chance. So I stopped and I said a prayer. I said my piece with the river. I prayed for the river, and just like put my heart into it. And then less than a year later, I'm having Michael Wan on my podcast, which leads to me going and visiting him in Pennsylvania. And to make things even more synchronistic, we planned this podcast a month or so ago, right? And I had no idea that I would be going on this trip. But Michael Wan lives in Lancaster, where Amish people live, and this is the Amish Inquisition, man. The first time ever this week in my life I saw Amish people. I was like, so to bring the synchronicity into the real forefront is like, here I am talking to Amish Phil, and just a couple of days ago I saw actual Amish people for the first time in my life, all by coincidence.
I can add another dimension to your synchronicity. Did you say Lancaster?
Lancaster.
Yeah, yes. Well, I'm in the county of Lancashire. Lancaster's 10 miles north of me.
Oh wow, okay. See, and yeah, Amish. I mean, come on now. I can ask where the inspiration for the name came from.
You saw an Amish person in Lancaster there, and I'm Amish Phil, and I'm in Lancashire. And that's just fucking weird. That is fucking weird. That's fucking weird. Now, I'm wondering now if you've manifested me or if I've manifested you.
I wonder. I think that's part of it.
What's going on? Is this you changing your reality or me changing your reality, Mark?
Both are simultaneously true. I think that's really how it works.
We're synchronized. Are we synchronized?
Like a swimmer, like a group of swimmers.
Oh my God. When do we get married?
We have to go through our swim routine first.
Okay.
Your legs to be flipping through the air.
I'm all right at breaststroke, but apart from that, I'm a bit,
Well, we'll have to teach you the butterfly.
I've had plenty of compliments about my breaststroke.
All right. But I gotta ask you, where the Amish Inquisition, the Amish Phil, where does that come from, other than being
have you heard of Monty Python?
Yes.
Right. They're a really famous comic troupe from the UK. John Cleese, Michael Palin, Terry Jones, and Jonathan Chapman, was it? Mark Chapman, I think. Or was it Mark Chapman who killed John Lennon? I can't remember. That's another synchronicity, probably.
I think it was Mark Chapman that killed John Lennon.
Yeah, he wasn't in Monty Python. Not that guy. But Monty Python had a scene called the Spanish Inquisition. Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. And because we're English and we're big Monty Python fans, I just thought Amish Inquisition's a bit of a pun. And it's sort of kind of ironic because Amish people don't have technology. So an Amish podcast is a bit of an oxymoron. And the other thing is, I'll tell you what it was. When we started, I think it was 2017, summer of 2017 we started. There must have been a big hoo-ha or controversy in the media about people being offended. And we started this podcast, and I'm a big free speech advocate. I think you should be able to say what you want, as long as you're not, threatening to kill someone or something. And everything in the media was people about being offended and oversensitive or whatever. And someone said, "What about the Amish? We can talk about the Amish. We can't offend them; they'll never hear it." So there's like about 3 different reasons. I mean, I know it's a shit name for a podcast, but that's the best we've got.
No, my girlfriend and I, we were laughing about it. We're like, "Oh, isn't that funny? You're going to be on the Amish Inquisition." And we were just talking, basically with people who live in and around Amish country. We went there ourselves. I mean, yeah, it's wild. You see them, riding horses down the street with the cart and buggy behind them, and they all kind of dress the same. So it's really, it's like a peek into, 400 years ago, what things might have been like. And
there's something that, I'll tell you what, there is something definitely attractive to me about leaving technology behind in that manner. I do wonder, if a lot of these things are a net benefit or not.
What I have found out, though, through my week being sort of in proximity to the Amish, is that they have a lot of loopholes, sort of like the Jews, kind of with the whole Sabbath, when they have certain technology they can't use, but they create this technology to you make a loophole so they're not offending God. So the Amish have those kind of loopholes too, where they're not allowed to smoke white cigarettes, but they can go and get a red colored cigarette or a black, or a brown paper cigarette, but white paper cigarettes are not allowed, So it's just it's kind of a interesting
racist,
thing.
really.
But the other, maybe, but what I found interesting is the powwow. That's the word for, or bruja is the word for this type of Amish magic that they do.
What? Amish magic?
Yeah, it's like a mix of German and Native American magic. And I found this so fascinating. These people outside of, on the fringe of society in a way, outside of technology, and there's this stream of mysticism. And you see it on their barns. They have these beautiful paintings that are like hexagram symbols, and it's like a sigil magic, and I'm sure they have little spells, and there's some folklore. We went to this one site that was just beautiful, this huge rock and a tree, the roots growing over the rock, almost framing it like a picture frame. It's a massive rock. I'm almost 6'9". I'm 6'8",
Wow.
So, and it was taller than me, this is a massive rock,
How big's your car? You don't look that tall in the car. 6'8".
I'll tell you that. It's a spacious Nissan Sentra, bro.
Fuck, okay. I had no idea you were that massive.
Well, also for your, UK audience, I'm, maybe it's a little head trip to see me on this side of the car, but yeah, it's a spacious Sentra. It's nice. It has enough leg room, I think. But
did you have a big? I'm really curious. Sorry, but I'm so curious about you. You've heard all that. I'm sure you've heard all this before, and you're sick of it and stuff. But did you were you the biggest kid all the way through school? Or were you like a sort of a middle-sized kid and then had a massive growth spurt at like 13? How did it work?
Well, I think I was average height in elementary school, and
Right?
then in middle school, about like, 6th to 8th grade, 11 to 13 years old, was when I was like the tallest kid, but I was never the tallest kid. I was just in a
Wow.
group of tallest kids because there was like, you know, this basketball player who went on to be, college basketball player around my height. And then there was a kid younger than me who was always taller than me. So even though I'm a giant, I was, not the only giant in my school for some reason. But yeah, it's all right. The average door frame is 7 feet, so I'm just like an inch away from hitting my head when I walk through a door. So like
No
the
way.
whole
Oh, wait,
house is,
ours are 6'6" standard door
you're,
frame.
yeah, the door. Well, you guys are using the metric system. That's why,
Well,
right?
don't get me started on imperial and metric. Do you know what was the who was it the ancient Greek guy? I can't remember which one it was who said man is the measure of all things, and these imperial measurements we had, they're all related to the human body. So like
Right.
an inch is the width of your thumb. That's an
Yeah.
inch. A foot is a foot, or distance between the elbow and the wrist. And it all goes back to fucking, even the ancient Egyptians had worked this out. The cubit. A cubit, I think, is the distance between the elbow and the first finger. And then maybe a royal cubit is the elbow and the second finger. I can't remember. I've probably fucked that up. But,
No, you're
it's
right.
all
The
these,
Temple of Solomon.
the imperial measurements are all encoded in our DNA, in our, classification, our species, our meat vehicle, whatever you want to call it. And there's
Yeah.
a reason that there's value in that to me. And we're in this country, we want to throw it away and use metric. It's like, no, you're throwing away a clue, part of the evidence, important information. We need to know there's a reason why the Egyptians thought it was important to use this measurement. We shouldn't throw that away for the sake of it adding up to 100.
Yeah.
There's value in that.
I guess in America we don't really consider it. It must be a sore subject for you.
Yeah,
I feel I feel
it
like I
is.
might not shouldn't have brought that up to be polite.
Yeah, because the Old English and the Celtic, they all use this system, this imperial system, but the metric system has sort of been imposed on us by the EU, European Union and stuff, and
Right.
I think it's a huge mistake. I think it's huge. I
Yeah,
think we
no,
should be using imperial measurements because there are reasons those units exist, and we don't want to forget that information.
yeah. Yeah, no, I mean it's
It's like a
definitely
mile. A mile is 1,000 paces. That's 2 steps. So a mile, 1,000 Latin mil. A mile is related to the human body. Sorry
mm,
for butting it.
no, it's okay. I was thinking about the Temple of Solomon and how
Oh,
they modeled
fuck.
it after the measurements of a man, just like you're describing.
Yeah,
It even kind of reminds me of the story of Osiris too, where they build the cage like that he gets the coffin that he gets nailed into. It's like the exact proportions of him, and that's just a metaphor for him coming into the material world. So the
mm,
measurement of this kind of structure of our anatomy is important. I don't know. Sam Tripoli, he calls me the Nephilim when he meets me. He calls me Nephilim when I see him in person. So if that's any measurement of how tall I am, but it's like it's interesting because I think there's definitely like some truth to that, like because I think my heritage is kind of in the Scottish, and there's a lot of really tall Scottish people too, right? And
yep.
and what
Jimmy
did you just say?
Cranky.
And really cranky too.
No, Jimmy Cranky is a famous tall Scottish man.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay,
Google it.
interesting.
You'll laugh.
Well, but that's my thought is like, well, what if there was this culture of people that were more in,
Uh,
trading and cohabitating with taller versions of humans, and that's why there's like weird tall people like me still around with like Norse heritage, or like
Yeah.
Northern Irish, or Scottish, and all of the different things that make me up. Not that I've ever done the ancestry.com. I did it the hard way. I looked it up.
Yeah. Another good
I had to ask my grandpa,
another good source for these linkages between the human form and architecture is the Gothic cathedrals in Europe. So there's a guy, a French scholar, I think he was French, called René Schwaller de Lubitsch, and he was knocking about in the 19th century, I think, if I remember right. And he's written loads of books, but particular one called "The Temple in Man" about the temple at Luxor, and all the different relationships between human anatomy and the dimensions and ratios and angles built into the fabric of the temple at Luxor. And I think he spent 20 years there. He was there 20 years, basically just measuring this thing, to the best of engineering capability at the time, like the most precise survey possible. And he devoted his entire life to it. And then his daughter, I think, took up the gauntlet and carried on his research. I forget her name now. I don't know if she's written any books, but that's a good one, Schwaller de Lubitsch. I think you'll know Randall Carlson from Grimerica.
Yeah.
And I think he's been on Rogan a number of times as well.
Actually, just booked him on Tinfoil Hat like a month ago. He was on Tinfoil Hat.
Well, that's how I found Grimerica, was because I was searching for Randall Carlson.
Oh, okay.
And
yeah, that's actually kind of similar for me. I got into Joe Rogan like everybody did in that time, like 4 or 5 years ago. And yeah, the Graham Hancock, Randall Carlson stuff led me to podcasting somehow. I don't know if it was Grimerica first, because there was also this Stuff They Don't Want You to Know podcast that was kind of like an early conspiracy show. And those conspiracy guys over there in Ireland has been around for quite a while. But I'm sorry to cut you off there, Phil. Let's hear.
I can't even remember what I was talking about. I was just listening to you.
America show. How you found that through Rogan and Carlson?
That's it. Yeah. And we had Darren and Graham on last year. I think maybe a year ago, something like that. And yeah, I think it's. Do you play an instrument? Have you ever been in a band, Mark?
No, everybody thinks I look like I should, that kind of thing.
So when you play instrument in a band, or you start learning guitar, for example, you start by emulating people who you like, and they become your influences. And as you get more competent as a guitar player, you start to learn to express yourself as well. So a bit of you gets mixed in with these maybe 3 or 4 other guitar players who are your influences. And forever, as long as you'll play, pretty much, you'll always have sort of remnants of a little stylistic twists that, that sounded like Jimmy Page. Or, that sounded like Hendrix. That, like, fucking hell, I just sounded like Hendrix for a microsecond. So something that you did, some idiosyncrasy in your play managed to perfectly mimic something Hendrix would have done, day in, day out. But I think that podcasting is the same in that you start by listening, and then you start to emulate the people who you look up to. So like our show, our first hour is like Grimerica, where we interview people, talk to people, authors, a lot of the same subjects as you, like esoterica, alternative history, the nature of reality, philosophy, all that kind of stuff. And so the first half is like that with Grimerica, but the second half is more sort of like OBDM or No Agenda. It's like looking at the news, trying to analyze it, see what the message is, learn the discernment that you talked about, and it's like you sort of suck up these influences. I don't know where I'm going with this, and then you sort of put your own sort of spin on it, like being in a band.
Yeah, no, I like that analogy. I've used it to kind of coax some of my friends into podcasting with me, because a lot of my friends don't listen to podcasts, unfortunately, like my friends in real life. But that's the beauty of it, like you were saying before, is I've made a lot of really great friends just who are already doing this stuff through podcasting, and then we kind of meet in the middle and form a band, and that's why I made this cooperative, is because we're all able to do our own thing independently, and with a guy like me kind of telling you, oh, hey, you should be on good pods and avoid anchor, and like, all of these other little tips that they don't tell you with the podcasting 101 videos you can find, or tutorials, like, so, or fireside chats, god forbid you ever host with them. I mean, they're gonna steal all your content, so like those are the things that I'm researching with the cooperative. And yeah, man, totally. I feel like Grimerica's show, the higher side chats, tinfoil hat are a big influence on a lot of people, and I try not to replicate their shows, but you're right, you can't help but emulate.
Yep.
And that's where you have to find the balance of being yourself while also emulating and being inspired by those who are doing it better than you. And then one day, maybe you do it better, and then they look at you and that inspires them, because we're all equals at this, we're all. And that's kind of like, for me, my story really kicked off into podcasting when I gave Sam Tripoli a copy of the Kabbalion, the Seven Hermetic Laws.
Wow.
And I was just a random fan of his, meeting him after a comedy show. And I said, hey, bro, take this book. I had it in this like Faraday fabric bag that I made. So if he wanted to like go off the grid, he could, you know. And that was enough for him to be like, okay, cool, man. And he remembered me, and then he had me on his Patreon show, had me back. He's like, this guy's pretty interesting. Let me have him on this show. So, and then one thing led to another, and I'm working for him. So,
Yeah,
and I
what
think
did you do it? Did you do one with Sam about Aleister Crowley?
yeah, that was, it's interesting because they just did an episode which was pretty cool. The Great Magic Occult Debate, right? That's the newest episode of Tinfoil Hat. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a subject that people were really fascinated in. And I knew that back, it was almost a year ago now. When I did that show, I was like, people are going to be interested in Crowley, but I wanted to take a different perspective on it, because I know a lot of people, there's people who like go into the Crowley history, but they like don't look into his darker stuff. And then there's some people who only look at the dark stuff he's done, and they're
Mm-hmm.
like, he's a criminal. Fuck this. You know what I mean? Like there's two extremes. There's
Yeah.
like people who are like, oh yeah, he's like my British yogi, and then there's other people who are like, no, he was a child molester spy. Like, so I found like this guy is such a controversial character. Let me add what I know to the mix, because I've studied him, a little bit, and he's a controversial guy. I have a bunch of his books because, kind of naively trying to learn about magic, I was like, all right, let me look at this guy. So I bought a couple of his books. One of them is like one of the most expensive books I'd say that I've ever bought. And this was way before I even listened to podcasts that I bought
Yeah.
this book. But it was really interesting, the feeling that this book, the Book of Magic by Crowley, it's literally his like Liber 4, right? The one that talks about the theory and practice of magic. And when I got this book and I brought it into my sphere, it started affecting things in a weird way, like it had a sort of like energy to it. And I've since kind of canceled that energy out, I think, by talking about it and like bringing it to the light. And there are things in that book that are a little strange, and you can take them one way or another. And it does talk about child sacrifice, straight up in the book. you know no, he makes no bones about it. And I think, context is important. When you're doing research, you need to understand the cultural context, you need to understand the historical context to understand what someone's really saying, because there were ways that people wrote that might have seemed one way, and from our modern perspective, from but their perspective, they're saying something completely different. So all of that combined, I created this kind of like perspective, like on his life, my perspective going from the beginning to the end of his life, and like finding the weird synchronicities and making some connections. And that episode did really well, I think, because a lot of people hit me up saying either I loved it or I hate you because you talked about Crowley,
Yeah.
or I hate you because you're a part of it, or I hate you because you didn't say the right things about Crowley. So there was a lot of negative attention that I got from that, but it was great because I'm like, wow, 100,000 people just saw something I talked about, and I've been having conversations like this my whole life. Just most of the people who were participating didn't want to be there. You know what I mean? Like, start smoking a joint with someone and you bring up like esoteric stuff, they're like, what are you
What the
talking?
fuck?
That's not real, dude. Like aliens, okay, maybe, but the pyramids, what are you saying? But
Yeah.
now with podcasting, I found people who actually like give a shit about this research and like, wanna learn more and have so many things to add too. Because I'm
Yeah.
only one person, I can't figure it all out. But that's my approach with Crowley, was like, let me highlight the darker side of this guy to kind of show people both sides of the coin, because there's people out there who just talk about the nice things he did, and there's people out there who only talk about the
Yeah.
evil things he
Polarized.
did. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think he's bad. My opinion, and you want to really ask me my opinion, he was a bad dude. He did bad things. He did things that I would never do.
Mm.
But that doesn't mean that I'm going to run away and hide and put my hands over my eyes and not see the truth of who he was. And when I had a conversation with Sam, it didn't go the way I thought it would, but that was like on me. I could have did a better job of explaining it, and that's fine. I think that added to it because I was one of the only people who've ever kind of like argued with Sam on his show in that way and got him all
Yeah.
fired up about a topic. To this day, if anyone makes a mention of Crowley on his show, Sam goes, "I would fight that dude." I inspired him to say that, in a minor way. So that's kind of like the solace I take from it. And I'm not done researching him. I've put it on pause right now, but I don't plan on like selling any of the books that I have about him. I think there's still more for me to learn about him, and like, it's just a matter of like perspective. I have almost the same birthday as him. He was born October 10th. I was born October 11th, so there's a coincidence I couldn't ignore when I first looked him up and got interested in this stuff. And I don't think it's done me wrong, because like here I am now. Sam, took me on, and I work for him. I also have the room to create my own podcast, and I do the cooperative thing, and maybe Crowley's sort of energy added to that in a weird way. Who knows?
I think you're definitely right about the way podcasters sort of democratized information, and that most, until the invention of podcasting, people had the TV, which was pre-programmed, and the radio, which was, all right, there's outliers, but, most people listen to the main BBC radio channels or whatever. And podcasting has opened up this avenue for people to explore different ideas and worldviews and find out information that wouldn't otherwise be fed to them. And it's definitely a universal good in that respect, I would say.
Here's a point that I think is emerged from podcasting that I wonder if you think is, because I don't know how to feel about it. I might be a little paranoid, but hear me out. Okay, so now these transcript technologies where they can take a podcast and transcribe it, right? I mean, think about what's happening. I mean, from one side, now publishing a book is easier than ever. You can just talk into your microphone and, create a book, transcribe it into words, edit it, publish it. You could put it out, without even printing it on paper. There's so many ebook readers these days.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, the other side of it is you can know what, like, figure out syntax in this reverse engineered way to where, like, what if there's an Amish Phil bot out there one day that's just like chopped up clips from your podcast, like organized in such a way that it seems like an AI consciousness, you know? And
Yeah.
like me too, like I've, put 63 episodes out. That's almost 100 and something hours.
Yep, that's enough.
Some of, yeah, it's enough. That's enough voice of Mark to like create a Mark bot, with this kind of transcript technology. So that's the side of it, as like a podcaster who's also conspiracy theorist. I'm not participating in something that is going to be a conspiracy one day, but at the same time, it's like, hey man, this is how I woke up, and if I can wake other people up through this vessel, like, it wasn't the total package, and I wasn't totally like a fish out of water before I found podcasts, but it like I said, it fueled the fire even more than cannabis could, even more than books could, because it brought it to real life. Oh, here's a guy who's all the way across the Atlantic Ocean who shares a lot of the same ideas as me, and we don't have the same opinions, but we can share, our opinions and meet in the middle and have these great discussions.
There was an AI bot that came online on a website about a year, maybe 2 years ago, and it was a Jordan Peterson emulator. And basically, you could type in any sentence you wanted, and it would spit out Jordan Peterson saying your sentence. In fact, like some of our episodes at the start have Jordan Peterson saying, "Don't forget to like and 5-star review the Amish Inquisition," or something stupid like that. Because it was up for about a week, and then they took it down. Jordan Peterson had it out with the guy who ran the website, and by mutual agreement, they took it down because they realized how dangerous this is. You can get Jordan Peterson on a video, an audio clip, saying anything you want. How does he prove that he didn't say it? Right. Well, he can't. Right. And this is sort of the danger, but...
And it brings to question every voice audio clip you've ever heard. How do we know that they haven't had this technology since World War II?
Fuck.
Like, or even, earlier. Like, there's, telephone, telegraphs,
This is where you need ethics to come in. You would hope that someone in control had some ethics and would decide that this isn't acceptable, so we're not going to do this.
Yeah,
but
isn't it funny that the guy Aristotle who wrote ethics is like anything but ethical? Like, molesting children and shit. Like, he's another person like Crowley. Not to make light of that, but it's like, this is the type of people who've created our society. It's just it's stunning. To really, the truth is dark, but at the same time, when we shine light on it, it demagnetizes the polarity, the evil. That's something that Ross Ben kind of taught me through speaking with him this past week in Wissahickon Creek in Philadelphia. And anybody listening to this, if you happen to live near Philadelphia, I encourage you to get in touch with Ross's work somehow, whether it's his book or his videos online, and like, look into it, because it's just like, it's so wild, like what you can see if you just take a walk around the city, and just see, where things are placed, and back to like the mounds and stuff, and rivers too. The Schuylkill River goes through Philadelphia. The Dutch people named it. I mean, there's just so much interesting history there.
Cool. Well, Mark, it's just clicked over midnight here. I'm gonna have to go to bed.
Kind of yawning on me, Phil. I didn't think it was because I was boring. I thought maybe you're tired, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just boring. No, that's fine too. I appreciate it.
No, it's been great to meet you. Finally, I've enjoyed our conversation.
Likewise.
And yeah, it's been good. I'm a bit blasted, to be honest.
You did kind of make a spur decision to smoke weed with me. I'm sorry to do that to you.
No, I didn't. It's illegal in this country.
Well, I'm in New England. It's legal here, but you're in Old England, and I'm sorry to hear you guys aren't.
Amish Phil from Lancaster.
Let let me tell you guys though, if you're in England right now, real quick PSA, illegal weed is still better than legal weed. Okay, get it from your local dealer. Don't go to the corporate dispensaries.
No, you can grow it yourself.
Exactly, or grow your own, even better.
Yeah. Not that I ever would like, but I don't touch the stuff personally, but yeah.
This has been a wild swap cast, right?
Yeah.
Hope to put this out on both of our podcasts, but thank you for having me, man. I appreciate this.
No problem. And it'll go out tomorrow. Don't forget to check all the links in the description. We'll all the social media links will be there. You're on Instagram.
Yeah.
I watched your live video today.
Yep. Oh,
So,
yeah, you saw me?
Yeah.
Even?
Yeah. You can follow Mark everywhere. And it's been really fun. I better go before I collapse.
Get some sleep, buddy. I appreciate you. We'll do this again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Take care of yourself, Mark. Happy travels.
Right on. Nice meeting you, bro.
Yeah, you too. Take care.
Take care, everybody.
Ta-ra. Oh my God. Okay, I think that's it running. I'll just make, how do I make you full screen? Go for that. Ah, that's it. We're going, Mark. Praise Jabulon.
Right on.
That's one of our catchphrases, praise Jabulon. Have you ever come across that phrase in your research, Jabulon?
No, tell me about
It's like it's something to do with like the Freemasonry triple godhead.
it.
So Jah being Yahweh, and Bull being Baal, and On being Osiris from ancient Egypt. And apparently this is some secretive word that they use, Jabulon. But I just found it funny and put it on a T-shirt.
Yeah. No, the person I just brought up, Michael Wan, he just did a presentation on Ball. And yeah, it's quite an interesting character. Personally, I think